The three main ideologies represented in the Turkish élan, as written by Yusuf Akçura, who himself was a Tatar Turk and a Pan-Turkist, is shown in his work titled Üç Tarzı Siyaset, or Three Styles of Politics. In Ottoman territories, he wrote, having been influenced by the West, there have been three major ideologies constructed with the ambition of progress and development. The first was Ottomanism, aimed to unite all Ottoman peoples of all religions and ethnicity under the banner of the empire. It was developed as a form of counter-ideology against the emergence of nationalism across Europe. Pan-Islamism favored uniting all Muslims under the rule of the Sultan. The third and the final ideology is an ethnicity-based Turkish nation or Pan-Turkism, as an echo of nationalism which was originally witnessed in the Balkan revolts at the time. Pan-Turkism aimed to unite all Turks and Turkic peoples. Peyami Safa further brings up the main questions that brought controversy at the time, such as when the history of Turks started, who belonged to us, and which institutions were to be embraced. To answer these questions, according to Safa, four main ideologies emerged in the minds of the Ottoman intelligentsia, three of which were also shared with Akçura, but Safa added a fourth one, concluding the four pillars of Ottoman thought at the time. Westernization of the Ottoman way of living, bureaucracy and thought by adapting modern European methods and law. These ideologies gave fruit to different forms of literature, propaganda materials, and societies which convened to find a way out for the empire. In the face of colossal failures, the inadvertent attempts to modernize the Ottoman institutions were giving their fruits. Sending students to Europe to learn the European way of doing things had brought the empire unexpected results. Because now, young students who were sent to Europe and learned the European way were envisioning a new path for the empire. As the heirs of the reform movements, this group of the Ottoman intelligentsia, mainly called the Young Turks, were modernists and staunch favors of westernization, and they had been inspired by the sociopolitical developments taking place at that time in Europe. Following the disaster of 1878, some members of the Young Turks had collectively operated in exile in an attempt to gather popular support for their common objective of liberation and progress, and to find a cure for the sick man of Europe. The Young Turks shared similar political programs, strategies, and tactics with the nationalist movements that existed back then in Europe. The young and intelligent groups started publishing newspapers and pamphlets, but most importantly started forming secret societies, which functioned all around the Ottoman Empire, some even beyond it. In the Balkans, in Egypt, Genoa, Paris, in Damascus, Thessaloniki, and more. Branches were opened even in Istanbul, which then had been under high censor and control of Hafiye, a pseudo-police intelligence institution established to protect the authority of the Sultan. The Young Turks decided to convene twice, in 1902 and 1907, in Paris, with the aim of uniting the opposition societies under one banner. The most sound one of these opposition societies would be the Committee of Union and Progress, İttihat ve Terakki Cemiyeti. The Committee of Union and Progress was founded in 1889. It later united with other societies that shared the common objectives: to dethrone the Sultan and bring back the Constitution of 1876. The CUP was composed of men and women with the aim of warning our compatriots and reforming the administrative system of the existing Ottoman government, which violates individual rights, such as justice, equality, freedom, and stops all Ottomans from progress and precipitated the fall of the fatherland into the hands of foreign molestation and coercion. The CUP holds a crucial position in the Turkish élan, as its ideology played a key role since its foundation, either with direct or indirect relation to the Turkish political history, from the triumvirate of three pashas, Enver, Talat, and Cemal, to Atatürk. All had been members of the CUP. According to Haneoğlu, the CUP ideology continues to exert its influence even today on Turkish political life. Tekir argued that there were two eras of the CUP, one being the intellectual struggle of the Young Turks, whose ambitions envisioned various paths for the Turkish élan in line with the four pillars. Tekir continues to indicate that 1905 was the breaking point for the CUP. But before explaining that, let's discuss the Prussian military école one more time. In the face of incredible losses in the 1877 wars, Abdülhamit II made contact with the Prussian army once again, which had gained fame due to its success in the war with France in 1870. According to the agreement made in 1880, Prussian military experts were in charge of conducting an analysis of the military education schemes and making suggestions for necessary reforms. For this reason, among the arriving military personnel, in 1883, Colmar von der Goltz had introduced many reforms to the structure of the Ottoman army and its education. Later, Liman von Sanders was brought in 1930, and he was appointed to command the Fifth Army to defend the Dardanelles during the Great War in 1915. Von Sanders stayed with the Ottoman army up until the end of the Great War. The Prussian involvement in the Ottoman army would mark a crucial breaking point in the Turkish élan. The young prodigies of these modernized military schools were now signing up for societies or creating their own to end the disastrous regime of Abdülhamit II. The umbrella organization of almost all oppositions was the CUP, which now had gained a new set of status with the involvement of the military officers. From 1905 and onwards, the CUP movement was shaped by execution and revolution. The committee, now having joined by groups in the military and thus empowered by sheer coercive power, managed its objectives one by one. A group of armed men led by Resneli Niyazi Bey took it to the mountains and thus began the revolution of Young Turks. Abdülhamit II, fearing the attempt would make a big echo in the empire, had sent a general of his to suppress the movement. However, Şemsi Pasha, a regimental army officer, was killed in action by a member of the CUP. Around 20 days later, the Committee of Union and Progress restored the constitution that was first enacted in 1876, bringing an end to the despotic reign of 30 years. İttihat ve Terakki, from there on, began to play an important role in the parliament. The members of the committee did not need to function as an underground and illegal organization against the despotic rule of the Sultan anymore. They had now been recognized as a legal party that could run for the parliament, and they had gained the majority in their first elections made that year. Utilizing the influence of the CUP in the newly established parliament, laws regarding the election of army officers based on merit were brought to the parliament, which would make it easier to remove those who were not schooled in the military academies. This sparked major unrest among the regimental military officers, and their opposition to the CUP were met by the Softa's adamant desire to restore the Sharia, arguing that the CUP's practices were taking the religious values away from the empire. The Islamic students and regimental military officers' reactionary demands brought them together on 13 April 1909 to riot against the CUP. The rioters initially deposed the CUP members in Istanbul, silencing their all members and censoring their newspapers. They had taken control of Istanbul, but the riot was to be suppressed by army officers close to the CUP. The army that would do it was commanded by Mustafa Kemal, who led the Army of Action to stop the ongoing riots and consolidate CUP's position in the parliament and over the different fractions of the army. The Army of Action, having heard of the riots, had begun marching from Thessaloniki to Istanbul, and on 25th April 1909 they had managed to take control over Istanbul. 2 days later, Abdülhamit II was successfully deposed and replaced by his moderate brother, ending the Sultan's 32 years of despotic rule. The increasing influence of the CUP in the parliament and in the army made the committee so powerful that it enjoyed the status of being a supervisory power in the years 1909 to 1913, gradually controlling and overseeing nearly every aspect of the Ottoman administration. In 1912, the Balkan League, consisting of Greece, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Montenegro, had united and fought a series of battles against the Ottoman Empire to carve up their own pieces of territory and establish themselves as states independent from the empire, believing their act of unison would bring them victory. The First Balkan War, fought between the Balkan League and the empire, made the Ottoman army lose around 350,000 in the span of 10 months. The defeat was immense. Following the war, Treaty of London was signed by the parties, which signified the loss of Ottoman influence in the European continent. However, the Bulgarians were not satisfied. The victorious Balkan League later fell into dispute and then into a state of war upon the alleged miscalculation of territory to be given to each nation, just 2 weeks after the Treaty of London. At the dawn of 1913, during the height of the First Balkan War, the aspirations of the CUP had become real. The ongoing failure in the Balkan Wars led the Committee of Union and Progress, in leadership of the young Enver and Talat Pashas, to realize their coup d'etat against the government. The successful coup made sure that the CUP would enjoy the power to rule the government from then on until the Ottomans' defeat at the World War I. Then came the Second Balkan War, which lasted for a month and granted the decaying empire its control back over Edirne and Kırklareli. The war included the previously neutral Romania to carve out land from the ambitious Bulgarians, who had allegedly more land than they deserved. Bulgaria had to fight alone against their previous allies in the Balkan League, and the Ottoman Empire, believing their chances of taking back what they had lost in the Balkans was a possibility, entered the war again. The coup d'etat did not erase the immense defeat at the First Balkan Wars from the minds of the Ottomans. The military failure led the CUP to further increase their pressure of rejuvenating the army. But before successfully doing so, the broken army of the empire, just 1 year later, would agree to fight alongside Germans, thereby having to defend all its borders, trying to secure a defensive win against the Allied powers who had been willing. The triumvirate of Enver, Talat and Cemal Pashas enjoyed positions in the Ottoman government, and their influence and decisions directly shaped the Turkish fate. As Minister of War, Enver Pasha oversaw the decision to go into the Great War by siding with the Germans, thereby continuing their military cooperation with the heir of Prussians. The two powers had agreed on warring against the Allied powers in the World War I. The empire was warring on all fronts, in the Balkans, in Iraq, in Syria, in Gallipoli, in Caucasia. The extent of defeat at all fronts only accelerated the swift fall of the empire. The Battle of Gelibolu was a breaking point in the course of the Great War, as the Ottomans took their only credible victory, and in doing so, refused the British ambition to slip across the Çanakkale Strait towards Istanbul, which would dismantle the empire right away and score a swift victory for the Allied powers. But the heroic acts of the Ottoman military in Gelibolu could not be replicated throughout all the fronts the empire had the battle on. When the Great War ended in 1918, with the Mudros ceasefire agreement, signed on an island just a few hundred miles away from the Çanakkale Strait, which signified the evident declaration of defeat for the empire. A few days later, the triumvirate of the three Pashas fled the capital to secure themselves in Germany from possible assaults they could face as a consequence of their failures in the war and their short-sighted policies. The four pillars of Turkish élan had each taken their share of humiliation during these wars. The ultimate consequences of the First and Second Balkan Wars made sure that the influence of Ottomanism had died amongst the intelligentsia. Apparently, Ottoman subjects in the Balkans did not wish to remain as subjects, hence undermining the credibility of the Ottomanist ideology. As the Caliph Sultan's call to unite against the infidels, the Allied powers, were not answered during the World War I, Quite the opposite. The Muslim Arab tribes desired a breakout from the empire and revolted against it. The devastating loss in the Arab front in the Great War had taken out pan-Islamism as a credible form of ideology in the Turkish élan as well. What remained at the hands of the Turks was a small piece of land, Anatolia, and a conjunction of pan-Turkism and Westernism. Enver Pasha would later give his life, failing to succeed in his attempt to establish Turan, the product of pan-Turkist ideology, as he fought against the Soviets in 1921 in Turkestan. And finally, it was the West who had killed the empire. It seemed that Westernism was only possible by being a Western mandate. Not anymore sick, but that empire would now be shared amongst the Allied powers, as mentioned by the Sèvres Agreement in 1920. The Turkish élan had arguably no room of action anymore. The capital, Istanbul, was now swarmed with the military officers of the Allied powers, who were welcomed by the compliant Sultan and his government. But every action within a nation's élan vital has a chain reaction. The culmination of every effort in the reform era, the schoolisation of the army, the establishment of İttihat ve Terakki, had once again given its fruit. A child was born in Thessaloniki in 1881. The same child graduated from the Academy of War in 1905. He would go wandering around the lands of the empire as the chain of command ordered. On October 1906, having seen the dire situation of the empire, the same man founded the Liberty and Motherland Society in Damascus. His society would later open branches in various cities and unite with the CUP. The same man then became a member of the CUP. A few years later, having seen the lack of organization and leadership, he would leave. The same man took part in the commanding of the Action Army, suppressing the riots against the CUP in Istanbul. The same man would take part in the Turco-Italian War, fighting along the lines in Tripoli, Libya. The same man would fight in the Balkan Wars just a few years later. The very same man defended Gallipoli against the mighty navy of the British in command of Winston Churchill, and succeeded in doing so. The same man, just a few years later, just before the defeat of the Ottoman Empire, had successfully defended Aleppo. On May 1919, the man started his journey from Istanbul to Samsun. He was ordered by the submissive Ottoman government to put an end to the disturbances in the Black Sea region amongst the Greek and Turkish communities. In fact, the Ottoman government had actually demanded that he would suppress the Turks, submitting them to the will of the Allied powers. But his intention was different. From then on, every decision he made and every action taken by him would change the course of Turkish élan forever. That man would later be known as Mustafa Kemal Atatürk.